Welcome to the This Is His Story podcast, the executive director and pastor guide to sowing and reaping online givers.
All right. Today we want to welcome Mark McDonald to the This Is His Story podcast from the Be Known for Something agency. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's always good to talk to you.
Well, I'll tell you what, I know you're a Florida guy. I see a jacket on today. Have you always been a Florida guy? Tell me a little bit about your upbringing.
No, I haven't. It's kind of crazy. I'm a little kid from East Coast Canada. If you go up I-95 all the way up the eastern seaboard of the United States, that takes you right into New Brunswick. A lot of people know Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, where Anne of Green Gables are. But I'm from New Brunswick, which is Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island are somewhat attached to New Brunswick, and we're attached to Maine.
I interviewed a pastor the other day from Canada who lives in Texas, and he just said he gets cold going back now. He said before it was no big deal. He goes, now I get cold. So with Florida, how's that trip back home?
Oh my goodness. So we have, we average, I think, close to 10 feet of snow every winter back in New Brunswick, because we have a lot of the nor'easters that come up and they turn into snow, and it just piles on. And, after, a few decades of that, I keep joking with my kids that soon they'll just find me in the islands off of the coast someplace.
You're going to be by the equator.
Oh
Your
my
90s.
I get chilled. As soon as it goes down below 50, I become this Floridian wuss. It's just awful.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Besides generic Canadian upbringing, tell me about your specific family and what was life like for you in your early years? Sure.
I mean, we were raised in the church, and in Eastern Canada and Atlantic Canada, there's a lot of really good churches. We had one of those churches that just took off. Our pastor was just amazing. I have a brother and a sister. I'm the youngest. And our church was just really involved, our family was really involved in the church. I usually joke that we had the magic ability to know every time that the church doors were unlocked, because the McDonald family was piled into a car and we were there. And, it's so crazy now because, oftentimes, what you do and what I do, when we're working with the church, when we're working with people that go to church, we talk about regular attenders. Well, our family, we were regular attenders. It wasn't how many times a month, like the way that they do it now. It was how many times a week was the McDonald family there. And it just seemed, we were there Sunday school, morning service, Sunday evening service. And then of course, prayer meeting, hour of power in the middle of the week. And then we were there for, there was usually choirs and choir practices, as well as, our youth group. And my mom played the piano for the church, and my dad ran the sound system.
Wow. Okay. So you grew up in church. Would you say that you have always been a believer? Did you have a moment like with me? I thought I was a Christian until later, and I really realized, okay, wait a minute, I didn't really understand what this was all about. I was playing church, not Christian. When did you sort of realize what a real Christian was?
Yeah, it was interesting because, our church, we certainly knew that we were born sinners and that we needed to have a time in our lives where we actually gave our hearts to Christ. And I can still remember I was 8 years old, and we sat in the balcony of our church, and I can still remember thinking, okay, God's really talking to me today. I need to go forward. And I am more introverted than I usually come across in anything, but I can still remember bowing my head thinking, okay, Lord, I want to give my life to you, but I'll only go forward if somebody else goes forward first. and then I can still remember thinking, oh my goodness, there goes somebody forward. And I said, okay, maybe another person, if another person goes forward. And it was on the third person going forward that it was like, okay, Lord, here I am. I'm going to go forward. And I can still, I got home that day and my parents sat down with me and they explained to me, this is a huge, huge step. I can't say that I fully understood everything at 8 years old. I remember my brother explaining to me that I was not allowed to fight with him anymore now that I was a Christian.
Use it against you. That's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. But it was really along the way. So in Eastern Canada, there was no Christian school movement at all. And in the late 70s, when I was getting ready to go into high school, our church decided to actually start a Christian school. So they set this up. My mom had actually gone back to college, and she was the first person in our whole family to ever go back to college. She got her education degree. And so she had just graduated, and our school hired her to be one of the teachers. And they asked my brother, sister, and I if we would go into the school. My brother and sister said no. And then I said yes, because I hate the public school system. I mean, it really didn't feel like I fit in there. And so the first day we showed up for the Christian school, and it was so new that the government actually served my parents papers saying that I was truant, that they had illegally removed me from the school system. So our church and school went through a whole legal process in order for us to be there. And I think that's really when it all started to sink in. Okay, to be a Christ follower, sometimes you just got to step out on a limb and do what you believe you need to do in order to be faithful.
Wow. Okay. I love this story. Yeah, I grew up at a private school as well, so I have very similar stories. It's really funny. One of my classmates had to sue to go to Texas A&M, and she sort of changed the law for everybody because she had to challenge, like, wait a minute, I know we're not accredited, but I need in. And it was a big deal back in the 70s, I think it was, maybe 80s.
Yeah, we had it was called Accelerated Christian Education, ACE. I don't know whether you even know that term, but that was the easiest way to put in a Christian school. And it was one teacher for the entire high school, and we all taught ourselves. So it was all workbook based and textbooks, and we sat in our own cubicle and we taught ourselves throughout the entire year. And if we needed help, we just asked the one teacher to come over. So it was kind of like a one-room schoolhouse.
Interesting.
And what it did was it really it taught me to have initiative, and I think that's where a lot of the skills of being an entrepreneur came along. And my dad had also left his long time. He worked for the telephone company for 30 some years. And then he started his own company, and then my brother started his company, and I really, it was infused into me as part of my, growing up, that I needed to take responsibility for myself.
Wow. Okay. All right. So tell me a little bit about your extracurricular then. If it's a small school, hard to play sports, right? Unless you did it outside the school.
A lot of sports. We had a softball, a small softball team that I enjoyed playing on. I didn't play much hockey.
Okay.
But we had a hockey team that would just kind of do some scrimmage things. And I tried to play on that, and then they made me a ref. So I became, that just means that I really was bad.
Okay. Yeah.
But we always tried to do stuff with, there was another Christian school that started, in our province that we started to compete with. And it was more on the extracurricular side of singing. So I became known as a singer in my area. And then also, weirdly enough, when I was, it was either 11th grade or 12th grade, we had an intramural competition, and our pastor came to 3 of us in our class and said, I think that God's calling you to preach. And I thought, well, probably not.
I'm glad he told you. He forgot to tell me.
Yeah. And he said, so why don't you all enter a preaching competition? And it was the very first time that I had ever stood on a stage and actually spoken more than introducing a song or like, to actually taking, scripture and opening it up. I don't think I did very well. I remember how nervous I was. Fast forward now, and I speak at so many conferences and like, it was really through college years that I mastered or tried to master speaking, but
But do you think your friend misinterpreted being an orator or a storyteller or confidence on stage with being a pastor, but really those skills were actually there that he saw?
I think so, but in a lot of sense, I think churches let some of their youth down by not giving them or opening up the idea that maybe you are called to preach, and that there are some people who are called into full-time ministry that nobody else is going to encourage them to go into that full-time ministry. So I, just looking back, I mean, that pastor has passed away by, several years ago, but he really influenced who I am today. And,
wow.
And I mean, it was really him that when he sat down with the three of us, I remember him instilling into us, the importance of somebody being able to take God's word and then communicating it to the masses. So, it really was one of those peaks in my life that I look back on that I never, so I am ordained, which still, it's like, I'm ordained as a communications pastor. Could I possibly stand and sermonize every week? I don't think so. But I certainly want to communicate God's love and God's word as many times as I possibly can.
I love it. Okay, so I don't want to force your answer, but what I'm hearing from you feels like a life of ministry, and then you're ending your high school career. Does your talent of singing, does your desire to get into ministry, like how does it leap you into extra education? And did you stay in Canada, come to the States? Tell me about that transition.
Wow. So I didn't know we were going to get into all of that, but I graduated from my high school, and I remember somebody saying, so what would you like to be? And all through elementary and junior high and high school, I had always said I want to be a veterinarian. And then along the way, I found out I'm allergic to every living beast. So it was like, well, maybe it won't be that. And then it's so crazy, but through Bewitched, the show, I have like two choices. I could either be a witch or I could be what Darren did, which was a graphic designer.
Great suits.
Commercial artist at the time.
Yeah.
But I kept thinking, you know what? I would love to do that. I'd love to use art and my skills with art and design to be able to do it. I was dating a girl at the time, and I mentioned to her, I would love to be what I called a commercial artist at the time. And I said, but I don't know where I would even go. And I don't think I want to go to a secular school. I think I'd like to go to a Christian school. And she said, well, my brother goes to a Christian school in the States. I think they actually offer some type of an art program. So he funneled information to me, and I didn't know anything about the school. I had never been to the school. I'd never visited the school. I told my parents, they have a graphic design program. I want to go. And they said, well, apply. I don't know if you're going to get in or not. And I applied. I got in. And it just seemed like I blinked and I was in South Carolina at Bob Jones University.
Wow.
And I didn't know anything about the school. It was a very conservative school. But it gave me really, really good training, and it extended, like they're really into the arts. So I sang opera. I acted in Shakespeare plays. I acted in quite a few graduate type productions, and really always partnered what I was learning with graphic design and that acting and singing and all of those abilities. And then fast forward past that and got married and so returned back to Canada, got married, and then I recorded an album. I recorded an album with the Gaithers at the Gaither Studios, and used a producer, one of Sandy Patty's producers, and then started singing. And so on the weekend, so I had my graphic design career where I was working my way up through one of Eastern Canada's largest ad agencies, became senior creative director there. But then at the same time, every weekend I was out singing concerts with churches. So in a 10-year period, I did close to 300 concerts. So that's where I fell in love with the church.
Okay, this I have so many questions on this, and they're probably not what you think I'm going to ask. Were you chasing something, or was this you just being so creative that you needed all these outlets?
That's interesting because I don't think I was chasing anything. I just always knew that, and if a door opens and I didn't open the door, then I should always try to walk through it because it could be God just saying, "Here's an opportunity." And it always came back to being faithful, and with all of these opportunities and recording and the ability to be able to go and do concerts, which it's like I was a kid. I mean, right out of college, and pastors would turn the stage over to me to take over an evening service and sing and talk and it's just crazy that God gave me that opportunity. But what it really did was it gave me the ability to be able to stand in front of a group of people and not be as scared as I was in high school, but to really get up on a stage and I can pretty much talk about anything.
And isn't that interesting? I can't sing to save my life. Or this is me, the old saying, you don't have to die to write a death scene. This is me projecting what it must be like to sing. But there is the artistry of the song itself. And then there's the presentation of the song in public, right? Because there's a difference in the studio and in public. And then there is somebody either paid or just happened to be where you're performing, and it's stage time. It's welcoming and transitioning and talking and preaching. And that in itself is an art. Because I've seen people who are amazing singers and they are really bad stage performers. And so it's an art. And so I guess what I hear you saying is you grew in your ability and confidence to talk on stage and to take over and sort of own the stage. Am I interpreting this correct?
Yeah. So the McDonald Trio, which my brother and sister and my parents would cart us around and we would sing every so often. Every so often, my mom would say, "So Mark, why don't you introduce this song?" Well, it didn't matter how many songs we sang. I would feel nauseous because I had to speak before I sang, because it was just so much easier to sing because it's all, it's memory and you just get out and do it. And weirdly enough, when I was doing my concerts, I got to a point where I almost dreaded the songs, and I loved telling the stories in between. Because this whole connective thing, if you're just listening to this and you don't see the video, I mean, I have like Discover Your Thread behind me, and this whole idea of the thread, it's really, how do you connect all of these oddly disconnected things? And what God taught me through my life was that I'm going to give you a whole bunch of opportunities and somehow I'm going to connect them. And those concerts, I mean, oftentimes I would, I would always try to do 6 to 8 songs. And in those 6 to 8 songs, they were sometimes different styles, certainly talking about different things. But one of the skills that I developed was, how do I tell a personal story that connects these two weird songs so that people in the pew don't go, oh, wow, we just changed the channel, right, or, just flip right someplace. So, I started to develop, telling stories, good stories, and being able to have that sixth sense where you're watching whether people are getting it or not.
Okay, I love it. So tell me how did that? I don't know another word to say it. How did that career die? Did the other one take off? Did you just choose, okay, this is not the life for me, or what happened there?
Well, weirdly enough, so all the time that I was talking to pastors, where in Eastern Canada we're really laid back and we love having people over. It's called billeting, where people is like, hey, come sing at our church, and of course we'll billet you, and which just means that we'll look after you while you're here, and if it's an overnight, you'll stay with us. So you kind of do life with the pastor and the family, and all of that. When I started talking to pastors, of course, the one question they always asked was, so what do you do for a living? And then I would explain to them, well, I work for a branding agency, or I work for an ad agency, or I work in graphic design. And so what are you guys doing to promote church, and how are you reaching your community for Christ? And usually I would get oh my goodness, well, we don't do marketing because we're the church.
That's a dirty word to them.
It really was. And that, like, this is through the 90s where it really, no one really talked an awful lot about church marketing at all. And as we started talking, I started realizing, okay, well, if I lead with marketing, I shut the conversation down. So that's the way that Be Known for Something came along, because, asking a pastor, so what do you think you're known for in the community, like your church? And it was a head scratcher. The pastors would oftentimes think, I don't know. And then, what I've learned in marketing is, well, what if you could control that message? So all along through that, I was working in a secular marketing agency, and then doing the Christian thing on the weekend. I just kept saying, okay, Lord, somehow unite these, somehow get me to a point where I have the opportunity to help churches. And along the way came an opportunity to move to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and work in marketing for a company. And it was just God's opportunity to get me into the States. And then I realized how many churches there were. And I thought, you know what? I want to set up an agency just to work with churches. And so we set up an agency in Winston-Salem, ended up taking over the marketing department of, like, the space where the marketing department of Krispy Kreme had, the head.
Oh, really?
And we always used to joke that when it was a really warm day, we could almost smell glaze in the walls.
That would be hard to work.
We wanted to put a hot now sign out at the front. So then when we moved to the States, I had the Atlantic Canada syndrome of, oh my goodness, there's so many more people here and there's so many more talented people. So I pretty much just said, okay, the one thing I probably won't do very much is sing. And so I
slowly faded away.
I dedicated myself to working with churches, and got the opportunity through, several national associations, church associations, to have the opportunity to actually speak. And it was weird to think, okay, so I don't have to have a song ready. I don't have to have a series of songs ready. And all of a sudden it was like, this is so much easier than to have to prepare to sing. And even if I have a cold or a scratchy voice, I can still be able to talk, where like every weekend I kept thinking, oh no, I've got a scratchy voice. I'm not going to, like, should I lower my song? Should I choose another song? And all of that stuff.
It all goes away. Okay.
Yeah.
Side question here, but are you the king of karaoke? Like, what do you do to scratch your itch? Like, you've got a talent. Do you sing in church?
It's funny because I enjoy music. I usually have music on in my office. There's the occasional time that I feel led to hum, but I really just don't sing.
Really?
My father passed away. My mom passed away when she was my age, which, it was actually, she passed away just before my album came out. So she never got to hear it. And she was my pianist. So the album was called Rejoice because it was out of mom's death. We can still rejoice. And then when my dad passed away, almost a decade ago, I sang at his funeral, and that's the last time I've sung in public.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. It's interesting. I told you I can't sing, and that's the biggest understatement of the world. But we do, karaoke in the States is in public, whether it's at bars or whatever. And so there's no way you couldn't pay. I don't even know how many commas you would have to put in a check to make me even think about getting up in public and embarrassing myself. But I went to Japan, and because, their culture is a little bit more private, you go to karaoke houses, and there's rooms. And so you go to a room and you only sing in front of your friends. And so it's like a hotel room with rooms, and they have your own TV, your own microphone, and they bring you food and drinks. And I did that. Like, that is the way to do karaoke.
No kidding. But since my mom played the piano for us, and in the McDonald Trio, my brother and sister and I were always there. If anyone came over to visit us growing up,
you had to put on the show.
We'd love to hear you guys sing. So my mom would say, "Okay, kids," and we would in the living room sing for like 4 people. And I used to hate that, like just hate it. And it sounds weird, but I would much rather sing for a few thousand people than
the one-on-one awkwardness in the living room.
Yeah, like they're tearing up, or they're like, so excited, and it's like, where do I look?
But isn't it a lost art? Like, maybe in the sections of the country, for some reason, I think in Kentucky they still grab banjos and meet at each other's house on Saturday night. But I feel like it's a lost art. We all have radios and our phones, and we just play music. We hear music. We hit the button. But the idea of just getting together and playing instruments and singing, I think it's a great community builder. Yeah, I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it, but I think it's awesome.
And I think that the whole idea of corporate worship that happens in church today scratches that itch, because when everyone's singing around you, and depending on what type of church you go to, usually either the organ's blaring or the band's blaring, so that it kind of covers up a multitude of sins. I mean, I sing my lungs out. I love that. And that's really my outlet now. There's the occasional time that I've said to my wife, it's like, I kind of miss it. And then I don't miss the rehearsing.
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah.
Being really transparent. It's just a lot of work. And now I just don't have the time.
No, I get it. Okay. So I guess, so we're into your career now, which obviously has grown. Tell me how long it took you to take your teachings and put it into a book. Was it one of the first things you did, or after a while you're like, I got to write this down?
No. So weirdly enough, like when I moved to the States, I in the back of my mind thought I could start an agency, but then I thought, no, I've got to be 40. And I don't know where I got that, but in my mind, I had to be 40 in order to start the agency. I ended up starting the agency, I think, at 38.
Close enough.
It was 37, 38. And then I started thinking, okay, so it would be fun to write a book, but what on earth is new and different that anyone would want to listen to? And then weirdly enough, as I started speaking across the country, there was this new thing that was coming along. And a conference called me and said, you spoke last year about websites. Would you mind speaking this year? And I said, oh, I'd love to. Thank you so much. And they said, there's this thing called social media. Would you speak about social media? And I said, sure. And I can still remember putting my phone on and going to Google and Googling
what is social
media. and it popped up and it was not an easy answer. And I said, yeah, well, let me do some research and I'll get back to you, but I'm sure I'll be able to do something. So all of a sudden I was at the leading edge of something. And I started becoming known for being able to explain what social media is and how do you create a page or a group or a profile, and then what type of content would you want and what's the pacing. And so it really took everything that I had learned up until that point, and it gave me a kind of a leading edge thing. And so a couple of magazines reached out to me and said, we love how you're speaking at conferences. Would you be able to write some articles? And I said, sure. I'm not really a writer, but I can try it. And I just wrote my 800th magazine article, which that's how so many magazines just started saying, would you, what about this? And can you explain that? And I've always said I have a heart of a teacher. So I love taking in that 500 to 600 words where it's just a really nice scannable size magazine article to really be practical and to break it down so that people can understand it and come away with some really good practical steps. So it was through all of those articles that I was writing, and I still, I write 1 to 2 articles a week usually. So I wrote an article this morning. I have another article that I'm writing tomorrow, and it's through those articles that I had the opportunity. Somebody said, well, why don't you write a book? So I talked to a literary agent and started, shopping it around to publishers. The book came out and it became an Amazon bestseller, which is right. Mind blown. Here I am. I'm a little kid from East Coast Canada that just has been faithful with a whole bunch of opportunities. And then so I wrote the book and started speaking about it at conferences. And that's when the Florida Baptist Convention had heard me at a conference. And I gave them a business card. I don't remember meeting them at the conference. I probably should say I did, but I really don't. And then along the way, they contacted me and said, so we have 3,000 churches here in Florida, and they're asking all the questions that you're talking about. Would you ever consider coming down and helping us? And I hung up the phone. I told them that I was going to pray about it. And we all know what that means. That means
I'll talk to you later. Right.
Exactly.
I'll call you.
Don't want to say no, but
right.
And so my wife and we started to pray about it and truly pray about it. And it felt right for us to move to Florida. That was just because I wanted to get warmer. But it was also so the one crazy thing with the agency, because of the amount of people that I had hired and the studio, there was just no way for us to be able to give, really good, work to smaller churches. Mm-hmm. And so it was an expensive thing. And when people would reach out to us, oftentimes it just preclude, a certain size church. And the thing that really interested me was, well, the 3,000 churches here in Florida are certainly not mega churches. Mm-hmm. The average church size would be somewhere between 100 and 200 people. And so I wanted to take that opportunity to figure out, so how can I do this as cost effectively as possible so that it was more of a consulting thing, and that I would go in and work with them. And I mean, I worked with, in the 2 years that I was with the Florida Baptist Convention, I worked with a little over 80 churches, helping them become known for something and then setting up their communication strategy. But it helped me, like create a product that is easier to use with smaller churches, and it's a little bit more cost effective.
Wow. So how long ago did the book come out?
Book is almost 5 years, 4.5 years or so. So,
wow.
And then I had 2 years with the convention, and now I'm back doing the agency and working with a lot of denominations. I love the Baptists. I was raised Baptist, but I love the challenge of hearing how God uses various denominations to communicate his message.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I don't know how you're going to answer this. I'm very curious. You and I have worked together before, and we've known each other a while now, but it doesn't mean that we've pocketed these questions and answers, right? But I used to, back when it was cool in the early 90s, mid 90s, I had the little funny quote at the end of my email signature, but it says, "You're unique just like everybody else." And I feel like with churches and the different denominations, people say, "Oh, but we're Lutheran, we're different, or we're Baptist, or we're Church of Christ, or we're Catholic." And my thought is, yep, you're unique, just like everybody else. That most of the things that you offer and I offer churches, it really doesn't matter because it applies to all of you. But there are some uniqueness. Like, have you found, I'm not trying to force your answer, but do you believe that everything in your book and everything in your style works for everybody, or do you have to craft based on the denomination or the personality of a church?
I mean, you do ask great questions. It's interesting that I talked to a pastor this morning. It was a cold call. They called in, and the first thing he said was, "I know you work with a lot of churches, but our church, you've never seen a church."
Yeah,
like
you've
that.
Never heard of it. Yeah, we're so crazy.
You know what that's like.
Right.
It used to be that I kept thinking, well, maybe they are more unique than what they come across to me. But nothing surprises me anymore when I work with a church. I mean, you look like a church, you act like a church, you quack like a church. Like, I mean, most churches are the same, and denominationally, it usually comes down to style more than anything. When the disciples were all kind of clustered around Jesus, and like, I almost think of every disciple, how unique and different they were. And it's almost like all these individual denominational people around him. And like, all of a sudden they speak up, and it's like, so what should we all be known for? Which is the thread that, what will really unite us? And then, of course, we know, I mean, Jesus just said, "Oh, well, they'll know you're my disciples by your love one towards another." And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is as I deal with whatever denomination, there are some weird beliefs in some of the denominations. And I try not to even look at that. And I just say, okay, so how can they be known for love? And then how do they communicate that love so that a community in their neck of the woods will actually accept it and believe it and realize that it's because of Christ that they can love that way. And, I try to focus on that in front of, like, every time that I give somebody a book, I write "Be Known for Love" at the beginning of it, because we really just need to be known for love.
I love it. Okay. This is in the weeds question, probably just between us two marketing nerds, but I find this with churches, it's not as simple as this, but I'm going to make it this simple. You're either this or that. They either only talk about their pastor, and their pastor is on their homepage, it's his church, or the pastor is on the other end of it. Don't talk about me, talk about the church. And I'm not saying either one's right or wrong, but it feels like I'm reining in both sides. It's like, okay, stop just that, or stop just that. But what do you teach when it comes to being known for something and you have a high profile pastor, or you want a high profile pastor? Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, again, a really great question, because we'll get a call from a church and they'll say, we just love what you're talking about, and we're kind of in transition right now, which is usually what happens every time a church calls me. There's some type of a transition. Either they're in decline or they've lost their pastor. And so oftentimes a church says, maybe we should just wait until we get a pastor. And I always say, okay, this can't be about your pastor. This has to be about the people that live in your community. And this isn't even just the people that go to your church, your congregation. I mean, you need to focus on, where did God place your church? And you got to focus on the people, and then find out what their needs, concerns, and goals are, and then structure some type of, you've got to become known for a solution of something that's going to interest them. Then go out and find a pastor who actually wants to talk about those things. Because once you figure out your thread that unites everything,
it's easier to match your thread. That's how you find
a pastor who just goes, oh, that's good. That can preach. And then it's like, yeah, hire them, because it's more about what they want than what he wants or she wants. And the interesting thing is that, I guess that if you don't control the message, you let the pastor be the message. And we as a church have got to figure out how you get past that, because a pastor's not going to stay forever and ever. We know that the more successful churches have a pastor who has stayed for quite some time, mainly because he's found that sweet spot that he preaches in, he loves in, because of the people around want that type of thing. But ultimately we just got to figure out, how do we take our eyes off of us individually and more on the message? And then that way, when there's moral failure, I know, shock, right? That there'll be moral failure. I mean, we're all sinners.
Nothing crumbles.
Yeah. And if we keep focusing on ourselves, something's going to crumble. And instead we need to focus on the message of Christ and be known for love.
No, I love this. I probably stole this from you, but I act like I didn't. But it's sort of opposite. It's the same thing you're saying, said a different way. Somebody, I don't think it was you. I think it was somebody else. We were talking, and we're like, what would happen if your church disappeared? Who in the community? What would they say? They're like, oh, now we don't have anybody that does blank. Well, that is being known for you. You were known for that. And if you disappeared, would the community suffer anyway? Would anybody even know? Well, the answer is no. Then what are you doing? And if the answer is yes, this church frequently filled this gap for this community, and that this is what they were known for. So if you quit, it would hurt.
Well, and I mean, how many times you drive down the street and, you look and you think, oh, there's a big parking lot. What used to be there? I don't know. And therein lies the problem.
Right.
I mean, churches just disappear. Like thousands of churches every year just disappear. And the community goes, wonder what's going to go in there, because they had no idea that church was for them. And that's what we need. We need to focus on, how do we become something that they really, really rely on, and then attach that to Christ's message. And therein lies half the battle today, is that the church has become so inward focused that the more you become inward focused, the more you shrink and shrink and shrink until you just disappear. And then all the outward people, all the people in your community, they're more caring about what can go into your building. How can we use that building? How can we use that facility, which is just a shame. It's
a shame. Okay. You've actually answered one of the big questions I was going to ask of what it is that you want every church to do, but I think you've sort of answered it. So I'm going to parlay that to the next part. What, on this side of COVID, what did COVID teach you that you didn't know before? Like what what was underlined or highlighted with churches, or that whole event of everybody going online for a while? And some people have sort of stayed and magnified their online ministry. Some people are just back to the same old business as usual. But what does Mark come out of the other side and say, wow, COVID and churches taught me X?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think what has taught me is that church as we think of church is not necessarily church. And I think that we all have that comfort, going back to, talking what we talked at the very beginning. My family, church was going to church. It was, it was meeting with other people, having people into our house. Like it was doing life with a group of people. And I remember along the way, when my kids asked for a phone that could have text messaging. And I said, what on earth do you want text messaging for? And they said, because we need to talk to our friends. And it's like, that's not talking to your friends. and now that I text like far too much, I realize it is talking to my friends. It is communicating. It is a relationship. I have a relationship with people on text messaging that I barely even know them in person, but I have a great connection with them. I mean, you and I have only hung out a couple of times, right? In real people,
real life. Yeah.
We have a great relationship. And in the same sense, just because you feel comfortable with church as you were raised doesn't mean that you should just throw away this whole idea of digital church or meta church or however you want to talk about it. Because there are people who can legitimately go to church and never meet any person in that church and come to the saving knowledge of Christ, become a Christ follower that will change the world. And the thing is that if we throw that away, like the potential of reaching more people is so much bigger on the digital side than it is in the person to person side. It doesn't mean that the person to person side isn't important. It just means that we need to figure out, how, similar to, seeing a neighborhood down the road growing up and they don't have a church and we should plant a church in there. We have a world that's growing up with digital capabilities, and they need church, and we need to create, plant a campus for that worldwide church, and not have the expectation of, well, we should do online just so we can get them to come through our doors, because we're really just dropping the ball. We just need to know the potential that's there in digital church and put the effort that we would if we were to plant a physical church, put that same effort into the digital side so that they can truly have a relationship with you.
No, I love it. I love it. Okay, I think this is the perfect, I have a couple more questions. This is the perfect segue, because I think when you and I met, we probably were scratching our heads to figure out how much we do that overlaps one another. And I'm thinking the more we know each other, we sort of know which lanes we fit in, because we're both technical people, if you will, even though I wouldn't say we are. We're more marketers, both of us, really, than we are technical. But because we work with computers and the word digital, that means anybody calls me like, hey, Todd, my hard drive's making this funny noise. I'm like, yeah, I'm not your guy. Or could you build this website? No, actually, I cannot.
Yeah.
So
do you have good earphones? Because that's the way that noise.
Right. So I guess while people are listening, like, what's your elevator speech? Like, because you even your answer a minute ago, digital, and you do help with branding, but what is if in the elevator speech of what you do? I know you're a brander and an agency, if you will, but what does Mark really do? What do you help churches do?
So many churches market themselves, and don't get scared of that word, but they promote themselves as a church. And the average person in our community doesn't need church anymore. So we need to figure out what is the uniqueness that you all do that will get the attention of the people in your community, so that they'll go, oh, well, I didn't expect to get that from a church, but that's what I'm looking for. And that's about discovering your thread, figuring out what that thread is that is a solution to a need or concern or a path to a goal that your community would have. And we've got to figure out our uniqueness, which gets back to that other question that you asked, where you're truly unique, that you can say, here's what we're offering you as a church. And even if there's other churches in your community, you become known for something that is more relevant and needed than all those other churches.
I love it. Okay. All right. This is, I think, one of my last questions.
We could talk.
I know. I could do this. I could do this all day long. Okay. You strike me. I have another friend who just came to my house a couple of weeks ago. You and him are probably one of the two most talented people I know as far as graphic design, and just he and you can do more than what you just do. Like some people are like, they're expert painters, but they could be carpenters and plumbers or whatever, and then they just happen to paint. Well, my question is sort of a backhanded compliment, and that is you're capable of so much. How do you say no to things, and where are you pouring in to say, okay, this is where I want Mark to focus? Because you clearly could sing still, and you could model, you could act, you could brand, you could build websites, you could do a lot. Like, how do you wake up on your day and say, here's who I am going to be and where I'm going to put my time, and here's what I'm going to say no to? Or do you have a trouble saying no? I don't know. I'm asking.
Well, and over the years, I mean, we just hit our 20th year with the agency, and I've been doing this type of work for 35 years. And over, there's things that come and go, like websites and social media and print materials and all of those things. Like all those tools and channels really rely on content. And so the pastor that called me this morning, he just wants a website. And it's like, yeah, you can have a great website and it'll be broken tomorrow if you don't have the right content. Mm-hmm. And so talking about content, there's an awful lot that the church can talk about, and there's an awful lot that the church does talk about. But we've got to figure out, how do we pull all of that together so that you're known for that one thing, that one uniqueness that everyone in the community says, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, so that it rises above the noise and it allows all of the content, all of the channels, and all of the tools to sing in unison so that people will actually know you for something relevant and needed. And to me, it's a disservice when I'm just working with them with websites, or it's a disservice for social media, or like all of those things. Yeah, I love talking about all of those. And then once we figure out the thread, yeah, you got to get all that stuff right. But then how do you make sure that that thread works through everything? And that's where I don't want to waste my time anymore talking about all those individual tools and pieces, parts. I want to figure out, so basically, foundationally, you got to figure out your thread, and I can help you do that. I can walk alongside of you. We start with the audience, and we figure out who are the main personas, what are their needs, concerns, and goals, what's the solutions, what's the paths, and then what are the 3 to 5 words that can be used over and over again so that it just unites everything that you do, and it just calms all of your messaging so that you just become known for that one thing. And then if you want to use other people to do the tools and channels and all of that stuff, have at it. But let's just figure out your thread. And the one thing that God's really blessed me with is the ability to edit down to that 3 to 5 words that's unique and simple and needed.
Yeah. No, I think the further you and I get in our careers, the more I walk away from tactics. I'm more into philosophy, and that's sort of what you're saying, is you're into the philosophical of, let me help you discover, find, create, and I was going to use the word exploit, but expose your thread, your things. And then once you have that, your emails fall into place, your social media falls into place, your web, everything falls into place.
Even your sermons. Like when you're thinking about, how do I preach and what's the landing point? Like, I had a Sunday school class for several years, and I know you have to land. You got to land the plane. You take the plane off and you get everyone interested, but you got to land it. Well, where do you land it? Well, when you have a thread, you know
it's easy to land in the thread.
Circle there that you can always land on.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. All right, brother, it's been absolutely amazing. Do you mind if I end in a prayer with you?
I'd love that.
All right. God, you are awesome, Lord. You are full of grace, mercy, and love, Lord, a love that we cannot comprehend. We're grateful to know that only you control all things. You hold kings and kingdoms in your hand. Lord, we thank you for Mark, how you have uniquely shaped and wired him. We thank you for the grace you've shown him in his life and the opportunities that you've given him. We thank you for making him into a man committed to helping others fulfill their God-sized mission in their churches, Lord. I ask that you continue to bless Mark and his ministry. We ask that you grow his reach, not for his own gain, but for your son's name, that it may be glorified. May Mark continue to pour into churches and minister to them and teach them ways they can reach their neighborhoods and the world, Lord. Show yourself mightily as you use Mark to expose your truths in churches where we fail so many times to be as excellent as you are. Lord, just give him their voice and expound the reach of that voice to the churches all across the states. Lord, we love you and we thank you for first loving us. And we ask this all in your son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Todd.
Brother, I so appreciate it. Blessings.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of This Is His Story podcast.
Overwhelmed at all the technical terms, trends, options, cost, invoice signings for your organization's digital strategies? Join other leaders of Christian organizations as we join hands in our closed Facebook group. Go to creativedigitalguide.com/Facebook to register and apply for access. I'm only allowing executives of Christian organizations in. No vendors, no high-pressure sales, no gimmicks into this closed Facebook group. Sign up today and be encouraged and informed as you lead your Christian organization. Looking for a free resource to help your organization move the needle on new names and donors? Watch the 5 simple shifts to gain dedicated donors with your digital strategies webinar. Go to creativedigitalguide.com to register for this on-demand resource built exclusively for executive directors. creativedigitalguide.com for more information of gaining donors and telling stories that convert to new names and donations. Fund your God-sized mission.